A widow was raising 5 children in a dugout hole in the ground with no door. The rifle was what I noticed first. Not the woman, not the 5 children standing in a half-moon behind her like ducks pressed to a fence. The rifle, a Winchester centerfire, the newer model, 1873, leaning against the sod wall of what she called a house. Barrel up, stock down, hammer at half-cock the way a careful person keeps a thing they might need fast. I noticed it because I know rifles. I've known them the way a carpenter knows a square or a farrier knows a hoof, not by study but by years of handling, by the particular weight of one settling into your hands. And I noticed it because it was the only piece of equipment on that entire claim that was in good order. Everything else was broken or almost. The door was gone. Where a door should have been, a piece of wagon canvas had been tacked across the opening, and the wind off the plane came through the gap at the bottom and lifted it in slow, heavy swells, like a man's chest breathing. The stovepipe that came through the sod roof had been repaired with tin bent from what looked like a lard can, and the repair had not held. You could see the gap where smoke would find the inside of the roof in a bad wind. One of the children, a boy of maybe 9 or 10, was wearing a man's coat with the sleeves cut off at the shoulder and the hem dragging past his knees. The littlest one, a girl, was barefoot despite the season, which was not summer. I had come looking for Orrin Purcell, who owed me money. I had not come looking for a widow and 5 children in a dugout with no door, and I will tell you honestly that when I pulled up and took all that in, my first thought was to ride around it. My second thought, which came about a half-second later and was stronger, was the same. I am not a man who looks for trouble, and I am not a man who looks for claims on his time that he did not bargain for. I had been that kind of man once, a long time ago, and what it had gotten me was a dead wife, a burned ranch, and 14 years of wandering that had left me at 51 years old with a good horse, a sound rifle, $200 cash folded into my boot, and a personality that people tended to cross the street to avoid. But the canvas moved in the wind, and the little girl's feet were bare on ground that had a frost in it still from the night before, and I did not ride around. I pulled up instead and sat the horse because you don't just ride up on a woman alone. You make yourself visible. You let her see you before you get close, and you keep your hands where she can see them, and you do not move until she gives some signal that your presence is acceptable. She gave no such signal. She came out from behind the canvas flap and stood in front of the dugout door with the children behind her, and she looked at me the way a woman looks at something that might be a threat and might not, trying to decide which. She had a face that had been outdoors for a long time. Dark hair pinned up rough under a hat that was too big for her. Her dress was clean, which surprised me. Everything else was held together with spit and determination, but her dress was clean and pressed, which told me something about her that I filed away. She did not reach for the rifle. That told me something too. "Help you," she said. "Looking for Orrin Purcell. Heard he was working this section." She looked at me for a long time without speaking. "Orrin's dead," she said, 6 weeks. I said I was sorry for her loss, which I was in the way you're sorry about a thing that happened to a stranger, and I meant it the small amount that such a statement can be meant. "You're welcome to water your horse," she said, and pointed to a trough at the side of the dugout. "Pump's working." That was her way of dismissing me, and I recognized it. I also recognized a pump that was not working, or a trough with a crack in it, and the water level going down, and I had just spotted the crack in the trough at about the time she made the offer. A woman offers you water from a trough that's losing water, and she's hoping you don't notice, because the alternative is admitting a problem she can't fix. I noticed. I swung down. I watered the horse at the low end of the trough where the water still pooled. I looked at the crack, a stress fracture along the bottom seam, the kind that happens when the ground shifts in a freeze and the trough isn't set on good footings. A thing that could be fixed in about an hour if you had the right materials. I looked around the place. There was a barn, half a barn, more accurately, and a corral with 3 fence rails missing, and a kitchen garden that had been turned but not planted, and 2 chickens living under a piece of broken wagon, and a stack of lumber near the barn that had been there long enough to get weathered on top. The lumber was the first thing I'd seen that represented real possibility. I took the horse into the half barn and tied him, and I went back to the trough. I will say here that I cannot fully explain what I did next. I am a man who has spent a long time being needed by no one, which is a condition you can get comfortable in. Being needed feels different than you remember after a long enough time without it. It feels, and I'm going to say this plainly even though it sounds strange, like something fitting into a place in your chest that has been hollow for a while. I knelt down by the trough and looked at the crack the way you look at a problem you're deciding whether to fix. And then I stood up and went to the lumber pile and found the pieces I needed. "What are you doing?" the woman said. She had come around the side of the dugout and was watching me. The children were watching from the doorway, the canvas held back by the boy in the big coat. "Trough's cracked," I said. "I know it's cracked. I'm going to fix it." She didn't say anything for a moment. "I don't have money to pay for labor," she said. "I didn't ask you for money." She looked at me hard. People do that when you offer to do something for them without asking for payment. They look for the angle, the thing you're going to want later. I've been looked at that way enough times to know what it means, and I don't take offense at it. It's a reasonable thing to look for. "My name's Cal Briggs," I said. "I'm a working man, not a ranch hand for hire. I'm just fixing a trough." She looked at me a while longer, then she went back inside. I fixed the trough. It took longer than an hour because the footings were bad too, and I went ahead and releveled them while I had everything pulled apart. When I was done, the trough was sound and would stay sound through another winter if the ground was packed right around the base. The boy in the big coat had been watching me the whole time from a safe distance. Not asking questions, just watching the way a boy watches a man work when there hasn't been a man working around for a while. I know that look. I remember being the boy who wore it. "What's your name?" I said. "Thomas," he said. "How old are you, Thomas?" 10. "Your father's coat." He looked down at the coat and then back at me. "Yes, sir." "He was a big man." "He was," Thomas said. He said it with a kind of plain, factual pride that only boys can manage, the kind that doesn't know yet that pride can break. I liked him immediately. I washed up at the pump and I was going to saddle up and ride, but the woman came out of the dugout with a tin cup and held it out to me. Coffee. Real coffee, not the burned, chicory stuff you get when times are thin, though times were clearly thin. I took it because refusing would have been rude and because I wanted it. "You did a good job," she said, looking at the trough. "It'll hold," I said. She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved across the plain, and we both looked at the grass bending, and neither of us said anything. "How long have you been out here?" I said. "Came out 3 years ago. Orrin had a plan." She said the last word in a way that was not unkind but was very tired. I drank my coffee and looked at the place. After a while I said, "What do you need most?" She looked at me sideways. "I beg your pardon." "This place, what does it need most, if you had to pick one thing?" She considered this for a moment. Then she said, "A door." And she went back inside. I should have ridden. That is what I tell myself when I look back on it, and it is not true in the way that most things we tell ourselves are not quite true. I should have ridden, but the real fact is that I had nowhere particular to be and no particular reason to be anywhere. And I had $200 in my boot and a skill set that was going to waste. And there was a woman trying to hold 5 children alive in a dugout with no door. I found the lumber I needed in the pile by the barn. Not all of it. I had to ride into the nearest town, which was a place called Cutter's Creek, 12 miles south, for the hinges and the hardware. But most of it was there, seasoned wood that Orrin Purcell had bought for some purpose he'd never gotten around to. The town had a general store run by a man named Harwick who tried to charge me twice what things cost. I paid what I felt was fair and walked out, and he said something behind me that I didn't catch and didn't need to. In the same town, I found a man who sold flour sacks and another who had a small stove in better repair than the widow's, and I bought that too, and had it in the wagon bed by afternoon. I don't know when I had stopped just fixing the trough and started doing something else, somewhere in between. I drove back out in the late afternoon with a wagon load of things I'd bought, and when I pulled up and the woman came out and saw the load, she stood there for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "You don't have any obligation to us." "I know that," I said. "We are not your family." "I know that too." "Then I need to understand what you think you're doing," she said. She said it evenly, not angry, but with the directness of a woman who has been dealing with men who wanted things from her, and has learned to get to the point quickly. My name is Cal Briggs, I said again. I'm 51 years old. I've been riding circuits for 20 years doing whatever work comes to me, and I'm good at most of what I've tried. I don't have a family of my own. My wife died in '61 and the ranch went with her, and I've been moving since. I stopped. I hadn't said any of that to anyone in a long time. It sat strange in my mouth. I'm not looking for anything from you. I'm looking at a piece of land that could be a working claim with some labor put into it and 5 children who need a door on their house before the real cold comes. That's all I see. She looked at me a long time. What's your name? I said. Nora, she said. Nora Purcell. Mrs. Purcell, I said. I'll sleep in the barn if you'll allow it, and I'll work the claim in the morning and you can tell me what you need done. When you want me gone, say so, and I'll go. No argument. She looked at me once more, that same look, looking for the angle, and then she gave a small nod and went inside. The canvas flap fell back behind her. I unhitched the horse and started unloading the wagon. I built the door that night by lamplight. It's not a complicated thing, a door. It's 4 pieces of lumber and a frame and crossboards to hold them true, and hinges and a latch. But it matters. A door is the difference between a place that holds the world out and a place that doesn't, and out on the plains the world is the wind and the cold and whatever else moves in the dark. I have been in enough places without doors to know what a door means, and what it means is, this is a place. I worked by a lamp hung from a nail I'd driven in the barn post, and the children came out to watch at some point, 2 of them, Thomas and the girl who turned out to be named May, and sat on the ground nearby and watched in silence. I did not talk much because I was working, and they did not talk because they were children watching a man work and had sense enough not to interrupt. But I could hear them breathing, and once in a while one of them would lean and whisper something to the other. Around 9 o'clock, Nora came to the barn door. Children, she said, bed. Thomas stood up without argument, which told me something about him. The girl was already half asleep on her brother's shoulder, and he helped her up with the automatic care of a boy who has been doing that for years. Nora watched them go inside and then looked at me. You don't have to do it tonight, she said. Be cold tonight, I said. I'd rather finish. She stood there for a moment, then she went back inside. I finished the door by lamplight, and when I was done I hung it and fitted it and opened and closed it until the fit was right. The sound it made latching shut was a particular sound, clean and solid, a wooden latch into a wooden keep, the sound of a thing seating into the place it was made for. I stood outside in the cold and dark and listened to that sound, and then I went to my blankets in the barn. In the morning she fed me. Biscuits and salt pork and the last of what was probably her coffee, and she did it without ceremony, setting it in front of me the way she set it in front of the children, no more, no less, the same portion. I noticed that. The children were watching me over the rim of their cups the way children watch a strange man when they don't yet know what he is. There was the boy Thomas, who I already knew. There was May, who was 7 and had large dark eyes and a habit of watching things for a long time before she decided anything about them. There were twins, a boy and a girl, who looked about 5 and whose names turned out to be Sam and Clara, and who had already decided I was interesting and were not shy about saying so. And there was the baby, not quite a baby anymore, but the youngest, a boy of about 3 named Jonas, who sat in a chair with a piece of wood he was treating like a horse, and was not paying attention to any of us. Jonas, Nora said. He looked up. This is Mr. Briggs. He's going to help us for a while. Jonas looked at me with the complete impartiality of the very young, and then looked back at his piece of wood. Thomas said, carefully and without looking up from his plate, What kind of help? Whatever kind's needed, I said. He chewed on that for a moment along with his biscuit. Then he nodded, once, the same small, serious nod his mother had given the night before. I had never had a son. I want to say that plainly here because it matters to what I'm going to tell you. I had never had a son, and there was a particular, I don't know the word for it, a particular sensation in the vicinity of the sternum when that boy nodded at me, as if something in me stood up straighter. The corral took 3 days. I'm not going to give you the details of everything I did on that claim because the list would take longer than the work. I'll tell you the broad shape of it. The corral first, because Nora had 2 horses she was keeping in the half barn and they needed the room. Then the barn roof, which had a section that had been patched with canvas and was not going to survive the fall. Then the kitchen garden, which she had turned but not planted because she hadn't had the right seeds. I found seeds in Cutter's Creek on my next trip in. Then the stovepipe, which I replaced entire. Then the window on the north wall of the dugout, which had been covered with oil paper that had dried and cracked. I put real glass in it, and the day I did that, Nora stood for a long moment looking at the light coming through it, and she didn't say anything at all. I'm not a man who is naturally easy with other people. I have been alone long enough that the habits of solitude are deep in me, the preference for silence, the mild annoyance at being interrupted, the trouble with small talk, the way I go still and inward when I'm working something out, and the people around me sometimes think I've gone somewhere else entirely. I am not warm, particularly. I do not say charming things or make the smooth kind of talk that puts people at ease. None of this seemed to bother Nora. She was practical in a way that matched mine. When I worked, she worked. When I fixed, she assisted without being asked, handing me things or holding things level with the competence of a woman who had learned to do it herself or not have it done. She did not try to fill silence with talk. She did not tell me what her life had been like before or ask me what mine had been. The facts that mattered were the ones in front of us and those we dealt with. What I noticed day by day was that she made decisions. I mean that in a particular way. A lot of people look to someone else to make decisions, especially when things are hard. They wait for direction, they check to see what you think, they hedge and wonder and second guess. Nora Purcell made decisions. She looked at a situation and thought about it and chose, and then she acted on the choice and did not revisit it, and she was usually right. When she was wrong, she corrected without ceremony and moved on. I respected that more than I can easily say. About 2 weeks in, Thomas found the problem with the well. The claim had a well, that was one of its virtues, a dug well with a proper stone lining, which was the kind of thing you almost never found on a claim this new. And Thomas had gone to pull water in the early morning and had come back without it. Something in the well, he said. I went with him to look. There was a smell coming up from it, not good, and the water when I pulled it had a color to it that wasn't right. Something died in it, I said. Nora came up behind me. She looked at the bucket and at me. Can it be fixed? Well has to be cleaned out, I said. Anything down there has to come up. Then the walls need to be lime-washed to kill what's in them, and then you wait for it to clear. She was quiet. How long, she said. 4 days, maybe 5. We need water. I'll haul it from Cutter's Creek until the well's right, I said. That's 12 miles, she said. I know how far it is. She looked at me for a long time. Mr. Briggs, she said, why are you still here? I thought about that. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because the answer I had wasn't easy to say. I'm useful here, I said at last. She waited. I've been a lot of places where I wasn't, I said, useful. Where I was just another working man passing through, and nobody needed anything from me in particular, and what I could do didn't connect to anything that mattered. I stopped. This place needs what I can do, that's all. She looked at me for a long time after that, the way she looked at things before she decided, and then she gave a small nod and went attend to the children. I cleaned the well. It is hard to say when I stopped feeling like a man doing a job and started feeling like something else. I think it was the night of the first hard storm. It came in from the northwest in the 3rd week of my being there. The kind of storm the plains makes that is not a single storm but a system. 3 days of it, wind and driving rain with cold in it, the temperature dropping fast. I had seen it coming since the afternoon, the sky going yellow-green in the west, and I had spent the last hours before dark making sure the animals were in, the barn door secure, the new door on the dugout latched tight, every loose thing tied down or brought in. We all ate inside that night with the rain hitting the sod roof, which is a sound unlike anything else, muffled. The way sound goes muffled when you're underground, as you are in a dugout with the earth above you and around you, the world on top and you underneath it. The lamp made a yellow circle. The children ate and then Nora told them to sleep, and they did in the way that children sleep during bad weather, in the complete animal surrender of being warm and dry, and inside while the outside does what it wants. She and I sat at the table after. She was mending one of the twins' shirts, and I was cleaning the Winchester because that is a thing I do when I'm sitting still, clean whatever needs cleaning. The rifle was hers, or had been Oren's, and it was a good rifle, a well-made thing, but the bore had been neglected and I had been meaning to see to it. She noticed. Oren's gun, she said. It's a good rifle, I said. Bore needs work. He didn't clean it much. Most men don't, I said. Don't find out until they need it. I worked the bore and she worked the shirt, and the storm worked the roof above us, and for a long time there was no sound but those three things. Then she said, he wasn't a bad man. I looked up. She was looking at the shirt she was mending, not at me. Oren, she said. He wasn't a bad man. He had plans that were bigger than what he could do. He thought very big, and he could only do medium-sized things, and the gap between those two is where a family lives when there isn't enough of the one to fill the space the other makes. I didn't say anything. I don't say it to blame him, she said. He's gone. I've been thinking about what the difference is between a man who wants something and a man who does something. I set the barrel down and looked at her. A man who does something, she said, and she glanced up then and caught my eye for a moment before looking back at the shirt, is a different thing than a man who wants to. You're the first one of those I've seen in a while. I didn't say anything to that either. I'm not sure there was anything to say, but I felt it, that thing in the chest, the place that had been hollow for a while, feeling differently than it had. The storm worked the roof, and we sat there in the lamp's circle, and after a while she said good night and went to the curtained corner where she slept, and I went to my blankets in the barn. I lay there a long time listening to the rain. A man came in the 4th week. I'd ridden into Cutter's Creek for supplies, and when I came back there was a man's horse tied to the front of the dugout. A good horse, well fed, which told me something, and I pulled up easy and sat a moment before I got down. I went in. He was sitting at the table. His name, I found out later, was DeCursey, a land agent, or a man who called himself that, which is a thing that can mean a range of things. He was perhaps 35, well-dressed for the territory, the kind of man who had his boots polished in a place where nobody polished their boots, which tells you something about what a man thinks of himself. Nora was standing at the far wall with the children near her, not frightened exactly, but alert in the way she got when something required decisions. DeCursey looked at me when I came in, and then looked back at Nora. "This your man?" he said. I did not say anything. Nora's eyes came to me and held for a beat. "What can I do for you, Mr. DeCursey?" she said. He had a land offer, or so he said. A man in the county seat, he said, was interested in the claim, the well, principally the stone-lined well, which was unusual in the territory and made the land valuable, and would pay a fair price. A widow with 5 children, he suggested with his eyes, if not his mouth, would do well to consider a reasonable offer while it was on the table. I listened to all of it. I leaned against the wall near the door with my arms crossed and listened. When he was done, Nora said, "Mr. DeCursey, this is my land and my well, and I'm not selling it." He looked at her, then he looked at me. "Your hired man is he," DeCursey said. "I told you who he is," Nora said, "and I told you my answer." DeCursey looked at the table for a moment. Then he stood up, slow and easy the way men stand up when they want you to see them not hurrying, and he looked at me once more. "These claims are hard to work," he said to no one in particular, "especially for a family alone." "We're not alone," Thomas said. He said it from behind his mother's elbow. He was looking at DeCursey with those serious eyes. DeCursey looked at the boy. Then he looked at me once more, and something in what he saw in my face made him decide to leave it there, and he went out. We heard his horse ride out. The children let out a collected breath that I don't think any of them had known they were holding. Nora turned around and looked at her children, and then looked at me across the room, and there was something in her face that I hadn't seen there before, or maybe I had and hadn't named it. Something warm and certain and directed exactly at me. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't do anything," I said. "You were there," she said. "That was the thing." Another 3 weeks. The garden was up. The barn was whole. The well was clean and running good and had been for weeks. I had repaired the fence on the north pasture and found a heifer at a fair price in Cutter's Creek that gave Nora milk animals for the first time since she'd been out there. The stove worked right. The children had warm clothes. I had found a woman in town who did good work and had paid her from my own money, which I did not tell Nora until it was already done. She found out. She came to the barn where I was working and stood in the doorway. "Mrs. Belfield told me," she said. I kept working. "Cal," she said. She had started using my name about a week in the same practical way she did everything, not as a gesture just because Mr. Briggs was too formal for the situation. I kept working. "Kel, it's done," I said. "Don't see the point of hashing it out." She was quiet for a moment. "You're spending your own money," she said. "I've got some." "You have $200 in your boot," she said. "Thomas told me he saw you counting it once." I stopped working. I looked at her. She looked back, and there was something in it. Not accusing, not embarrassed, just that direct, clear look she had, the one that saw what was there. "Half of it's been spent," I said. "I know," she said. We looked at each other across the barn. "Mrs. Purcell," I said. "Nora," she said. "Nora," I set down what I was holding. "I'm going to say something plain, and you can tell me to get off your claim when I'm done." She waited. "I've been moving since I was 31 years old," I said. "I didn't particularly plan to stop anywhere, but I stopped here, and the longer I'm here, the harder it is to think about being anywhere else. Not because I feel obligated, because this is the first place in a long time that feels like a place." I stopped. "And you and your children are a family, and I stopped again. "I'm not good at this," I said. "You're doing fine," she said, quiet. "I'm not asking you for anything you're not willing to give," I said, "but I'd like to stay if you'll have me." She was quiet for a long time, looking at me. Looking in the way she looked at things, carefully, thoroughly, taking her time, not going anywhere until she decided. Then she crossed the barn to where I was standing. She stopped about an arm's length away, and she looked up at me. She was small, Nora smaller than she seemed from a distance, because she held herself so straight, and she reached up and put her hand against the side of my face. Her hand was rough from work and warm, and the warmth of it went all through me in a way I hadn't felt in so long that it was strange, almost strange enough to step back from. I didn't step back. "You were already staying," she said. I put my hand over hers, there against my face. "I know," I said. She looked at me a moment longer. Then she went up on her toes and pressed her forehead to my jaw, the way you lean into something solid when you are tired of holding yourself up alone. And I put my arm around her, and she let me hold her. And she smelled of wood smoke and clean cotton, and the particular human warmth of a woman who works hard and keeps herself. And I held her there in the barn doorway with the October light coming long and flat across the plain, and I thought, here. This is the one. Thomas found us. He came around the corner of the barn at a run with something to tell his mother, skidded to a stop, and took in the scene with 10-year-old seriousness, and looked at me. I looked back at him. He held the look for about 3 seconds. Then he gave a single nod, the same small nod he'd given over breakfast weeks ago, the same as his mother's. And he went back around the corner with the thing he'd been going to say, apparently decided to wait. Nora laughed, a real laugh, short and quiet, into my collar. "He'll be insufferable now," she said. "Good man," I said. She pulled back and looked at me, and there was something in her face that I need to try to say right because I don't want to miss it. It wasn't the look of a woman who had been saved. It wasn't soft or surrendered or grateful in the small, diminished way. It was the look of a woman who had made a choice and was satisfied with it, fully decided, fully present, the same practical certainty she brought to everything, directed at me, choosing me. A 51-year-old man with a worn coat and dirt under his fingernails and money running low and no particular claim to anything except that I showed up and stayed and did what needed doing. That look. I have thought about that look more times than I can count since, and what I think is this. A man can spend a long time not knowing what he needs, doing fine without it, getting from one day to the next, and then a woman looks at him like that, and he knows that the thing he's been doing fine without was this. Exactly this. We were married in November. Judge Haverson in Cutter's Creek. Nora in her clean pressed dress and me in the cleanest thing I owned, which was only middling, and Thomas standing at his mother's left shoulder with the gravity of a boy who understands he is part of something important. The twins couldn't stop giggling, which nobody minded. May stood very still and watched everything, the way she always did, and I think she understood it better than anyone. Jonas didn't know what was happening, but had gotten hold of a piece of the judge's curtain, and was pulling on it with great concentration. We drove back out in the wagon in the late afternoon. I remember the light November light, the thin, clear kind, long shadows, the plain all gold and brown and going brown, the sky the particular deep blue that comes in the cold. Nora sitting next to me on the wagon seat with her shoulder against my arm and Thomas on her other side. The children in the wagon bed behind us, the twins asleep against each other, May looking out at the passing land. I remember coming over the rise that was the last rise before the claim, and seeing the dugout below with the barn solid beside it, and the fence lined straight, and the garden rested for winter and the smoke coming from the stovepipe in a clean, straight column, because there was no wind that evening. And the door I had built by lamplight on the first night, hung square in the opening, the wood already starting to show the weathering that is not damage, but the mark of a thing that has been in use. I pulled up for a moment, just for a moment looking at it. Nora looked at me. "Come on then," she said. I clicked the horse forward. We went down off the rise toward the lamplit door and the smoke and the particular smell of a homestead in the late afternoon, wood smoke and turned earth, and the animals settled for the evening. And I was 51 years old and I was home, and I would not have traded it for anything in this world. Not for anything,